Trigger warning. This content may contain offensive materials. It may also contain flashing lights, loud noises, and other triggers if you are easily bothered by true crime, the paranormal, or dark content in general. Please turn back now.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Malachi from Hoosier Paranormal, and today we're going to explore some stories from a crazy place called the Land Between the Lakes. I cannot say whether some of these stories are true or not, but today we're going to try our best to either debunk or prove some of the facts and myths of this land. Before we start, I'd like to say thank you for joining me again or joining me for the first time. If this is in fact your first time, I am a paranormal investigator that likes to spend some time in the field, but my true passion lies in storytelling and history. I also have a lot of fun debunking urban legends with all the facts that I can, and ruining people's fun in general. The last part was obviously a joke, but I really do enjoy what I do, so make sure you leave a like and hit that subscribe button to support my journey into the unknown. Now let's get into the mystery of the Land Between the Lakes. Before I get into some of the legends of the land, I wanted to go over some of the facts. The Land Between the Lakes is a peninsula. Pretty much it's a land surrounded almost completely by water. It's located in western parts of Kentucky and Tennessee, and it was once home to over 2,000 families and several small communities. All of their properties were purchased in the early 1960s by the Tennessee Valley Authority, and they were made to move except for one man who refused to sell his house. That man didn't end up leaving until 1989 or so that was about 20 years after everyone else had left. But since then, no one's been allowed to live on the land that spans about 267 odd miles across 2 states. The Land Between the Lakes is home to elk, the American bison, several types of deer. It's also allegedly home to bobcats and river otter and some foxes, among other creatures. Some would even say supernatural creatures. LBL is also home to several odd structures such as Hotel California, the Vampire Motel, and the Last Residence Home. The Land Between the Lakes is also home to several dilapidated iron furnaces that were once ran by slaves before the Civil War. I may or may not own a couple pieces of coal that I've personally removed from one of these furnaces as a teenager, mostly to see if I'd be followed by anything supernatural or have bad luck or anything, and unfortunately or fortunately, I was not. Now, the Land Between the Lakes is a very popular attraction throughout the Midwest, so there's likely a lot to do. Some of the activities you can partake in are hiking, biking, fishing, hunting, boating, dirt biking, camping. So it mostly involves outdoor activities, and in such a remote area, outdoor activities typically produce stories of Bigfoot, dogmen, wendigos, and so many other cryptids, some of which are exclusive to their areas. But with that being said, there's no shortage of monster stories and urban legends in the LBL. But before we get into those thrilling monster stories that you all probably crave just as much as I do, let's talk about some of the history of some of the structures for some factual backstory in some of these tales. I've personally visited 2 sites in the LBL, those being Hotel California and the Great Western Furnace. So those will be the first I talk about. Hotel California was actually never a hotel. In fact, it was someone's house. That someone being Grover Marler, who was said to be a riverboat captain. He built this large house for him and his wife, Jamie Bennett, to retire in, but for some reason I couldn't find when the house was actually built. But I do know that the Marlers did not reside on the property when the TVA purchased the land in the 60s. I believe it was 1963. The next structure is the Great Western Furnace, which was built in 1854 and was opened in 1855. The nearby communities depended on the furnace for money while it was open, but that was short-lived because it closed down due to lack of ore, and allegedly some kind of slave insurrection. The furnace was put up for sale in 1856 along with 80 slaves that helped run the furnace. In the time that the furnace was opened, it produced 1,350 tons of iron. There were several other furnaces in the area, but only one other is still visible today, and that is the center furnace, and it was in business from about 1852 to about 1912. Another structure that still resides in the national park is the structure dubbed the Vampire Motel. Now, the Vampire Motel has some weird history to it. It starts normal enough. The house was built sometime after 1945 and was considered very nice for its time. The owner of the house, Dorothy B. Keith, used the Vampire Motel as a vacation home before the TVA bought and partially destroyed it in the 60s like every other home in the LBL. This house was only a 1-story house, but it featured a walkout basement that led to an arched patio, and just like the Grover home, it was also completely made out of concrete. The structure, at least. After its partial deconstruction is when it gained the name the Vampire Motel because of its new frequent residents. The Kentucky Vampire Clan, which gained national infamy in 1996 when 4 of its members slayed a couple in Florida, often performed blood rituals at their newly formed hangout spot. But what remained of the structure was reduced to rubble because of the bad publicity of the area, and now all that remains is its foundation. The final structure of note is the old Griffin home, which is now protected by the TVA authority, and was not destroyed in 1963 because its resident, Cleo Griffin, refused to leave. Now that you know the history of the land between the lakes, let's talk about the interesting part, the myths and the legends of the LBL. Because there are quite a few, the most famous of which is the Beast of the LBL, and there are several stories surrounding it. The Beast is believed to be a wolf man, which is exactly what it sounds like, a gigantic half-man, half-wolf creature that is said to stand over 7 feet tall. Allegedly, Native Americans that lived in the area long ago believe this creature is more like a skinwalker or a manito. If you don't know what a manito is, you can look at my Okefenokee video. It explains everything. But pretty much, both of these creatures have the ability to shapeshift. Other legends say a man from Europe said he was moving to the land between the rivers, which would be the LBL, in the 1800s. They said this man had a disease that turned him mad after nightfall. The disease was said to be genetic and passed to him from his ancestors and from him to his children. In the 1890s, the man and his family disappeared and their home was found abandoned. The last legend says that the monster was a shape-shifting, shoddy man who was killed in wolf form. They said he still haunts the land searching for revenge. I couldn't tell you if any of these legends are true or if the beast is real or not. That's the issue with a lot of these cryptids or undiscovered beasts, but there's more to the story. In the early days of the American expansion into Kentucky, hunters were often warned of the beast. There are allegedly many reports of hunters finding wild bison with their throats ripped open with massive claws. What's even stranger is employees of the modern-day animal reserve are said to find bison calves missing every now and then. Typically when this happens, the herd is said to be spooked for days. Now there are reports of bobcats in the area, so it could very well be a big cat that preys on these creatures. Hunters have also reported very strange howls in the LBL. One of the most famous sightings of the beast was in 1973 by a group of college students from the nearby town of Murray, Kentucky. The students decided to go camping on a warm spring weekend to blow off steam. Now, the first rule of any horror movie is to stay with the group, especially in the woods. But one of the boys decided to walk into the woods to relieve himself. When he reconnected with his friends, he said that he felt like he was being watched while he was in the woods. He also explained that he had heard weird sniffing sounds. As the sun began to set, they started to hear something big roaming around their campsite. The boys began to grow anxious, so they started to shine their lights into the woods, but they saw nothing. However, they started hearing very eerie howling. After a while of this, they are said to have seen red glowing eyes run past their sight. The boys ended up calling it quits and attempted to drive off into the night, but as the boys retreated, they noticed that they were being pursued by a giant shadowy creature. I can only imagine that they were driving out of there like bats out of hell, but little did it matter because they had to slow down to turn their vehicle. As they did, their Volkswagen jolted, and they believed the beast was holding the car back. They claimed to find deep claw marks in the back of their car when they returned to their campus, but I couldn't find any pictures to back up that statement. If you do find a picture to back up that statement, please let me know in the comments. In the 1980s, the police allegedly found a family killed in their mobile camper, and the family's daughter found half-eaten in the woods. And obviously, it was blamed on the beast, or I wouldn't be talking about it right now. But there's not much known about the alleged case. In fact, there's no proof that it ever happened at all, meaning there's no police report or news coverage. But I believe that this story is based on an unsolved murder that happened in the same area in 1980. Two sisters, Vicky Stout, who was 16, and Carla Atkins, who was 14, went missing in September of 1980 and were unfortunately found dead in October of the same year in the Lost Creek area of LBL. The girls lived in a mobile home in Dover, Tennessee, and seemed to be very popular among people their ages, as they often threw parties in the woods behind their house. One day they walked to a local store around 3 p.m. and they never returned after that. They were reportedly last seen talking to a man in a blue truck, but their case is still unsolved. They reportedly died of 2 shotgun blasts to each of their heads. Another story of the LBL starts on Highway 68 to 80. Supposedly a trucker died in a crash driving through the national park one night, and now follows unknowing drivers to the park's end. Several people have reportedly seen ghostly headlights of a semi-truck following them until they cross the park's border, and I hope one day I get to experience this spooky phenomenon for myself. Sightings of the lights have also been seen around the woodland trace of LBL. The next story involves the towns that were drowned in the making of the LBL. Now, most towns have a cemetery, right? It's said that the residents of these cemeteries are very upset that their graves were desecrated, and it causes a negative energy to loom over the land. They are believed to haunt the forest now, searching for the people responsible and causing trouble as they go. people tend to report seeing glowing red eyes, which seems to be popular among Beast of the Land Between the Lakes stories as well, and human husks roaming the woods. It's said that Civil War soldiers, both Confederate and Union, from nearby forts such as Fort Henry, Fort Defiance, and nearby historical battlefields haunt the LBL as well. Slaves from places such as the Great Western Furnace are probably a pretty good ghostly candidate too. Now that you've heard some of the incredible and uncredible stories of the land between the lakes, what do you think? Could a werewolf or a dogman be stalking the park? Could the old residents that once lived in the park and have passed on still haunt the park? Could it be the missing creek children that were dumped in the park? Or could it all be bullshit? I'm definitely a skeptic when it comes to the dogman, even with the pictures and the footprints that have been taken and found. But maybe one day I will have my own run-in with the creature or any of the other legends that surround the place. Now, as for the Phantom Trucker, I was unable to find any truck crashes, but there are quite a few fatal car accidents that have occurred in the area. So any one of these deaths could be a cause for a haunting. If you went to the LBL, I could not truly tell you if it's haunted or not, or if you'll have a strange encounter with some sort of monster. Mostly because I never have. But there are still dangerous wild animals in the area, such as wild hog and possibly bobcats. So if you plan to make a trip to the LBL, please be careful, especially if you decided to visit someplace such as Hotel California. Many of these structures are extremely decayed, but somehow they still maintain their natural beauty. So let's keep it that way, monsters or not. As I said before, this is episode 3 of hopefully a 10 episode series, so make sure you stick around my channel for the next 7 episodes. And don't forget to check out the last 2 for more interesting mysteries and debunked legends. But also check out my actual paranormal investigation videos as well, and my TikTok, which also goes by Hoosier Paranormal. But until next time, I've been Malachi from Hoosier Paranormal, and remember, if you ever see a group of white-tailed deer in the LBL, run as fast as you can in the opposite direction. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.